Welcome back to the Balkans, everyone. I'm Lauren Wood-Viscardi, and I'll be assisted today by Cynthia Forbes. And we will not carry on too long here. We'll just let Sal take it away.
Okay. Let me get this properly up there. Okay, so today, we've gotten up to the point where the Civil War is taking place in the former Yugoslavia. And today we're going to talk about Srebrenica. And what the circumstances that Serbia had resisted splitting up Yugoslavia into independent states. It then has changed its mind, and what it wants is to take lands from Croatia and from Bosnia-Herzegovina, so that which are lands that they claim are inhabited by Serbs, and what they want to do is to bring all the Serbs and the lands that they live on under the umbrella of Serbia, and that they will then become an independent state. What you have, though, is within Bosnia, there are Serbians that live there. There are Croatians that live there from a nationalistic standpoint, but then from the religious standpoint, you have a substantial Islamic population and partial Roman Catholic populations. So what you will get is that Bosnian Serbs, the Serbs who are living in Bosnia, they form their own militias. They are then going to be supported by the Serbian army for war against the Bosnians, seizing lands and ethnically cleansing the population. It is important to make a distinction between what is a militia and what is a more organized and trained army. And when you get militias, you often get where people are very undisciplined. They get into the bloodshed and become extremely brutal in the process. And so Bosnian Serbs, acting with complicity of Serbia, they attack and they rape Bosnia.
In early 1992, events pick up speed. In January, the Serb-populated areas in Bosnia-Herzegovina merge to form a Serbian republic, the Republika Srpska. On the 1st of March, Muslims and Croats vote for the independence of Bosnia-Herzegovina in a referendum. Hoping to prevent a major war, Europeans and Americans recognize the country as a sovereign state just a month later. For Radovan Karadzic, it becomes clear that he will split off the Serbian territories in Bosnia by force. Militarily, he has a clear advantage.
As Bosnia became independent and the Yugoslav People's Army ceased to exist, most of the resources of the army as had been in Bosnia and Herzegovina were left, and they were left to the Bosnian Serb army.
Almost overnight, Karadzic receives a powerful army, led by Ratko Mladic as commander-in-chief.
He'd become a hero defending Serbians in Croatia. By the time he was appointed to be commander of the Bosnian Serb army, he already had an established reputation and record.
The first battlefield is the city of Bijeljina. This is where war tactics are tested. As in Croatia, paramilitaries are an important part of Serbian warfare. They also use sexual violence as a weapon of war and systematically rape Muslim women. The Muslim Nusreta Sivac was fired as judge in 1992 and taken to a Serbian camp near her hometown, Prijedor.
The nights were an ordeal. During the day, prisoners were interrogated there. The rooms were full of blood. The floor was full of blood. The walls were full of blood. The instruments of torture were often left lying around.
As a young woman, she stays imprisoned in the Omarska camp for 3 months.
We had to do everything the guards commanded. And of course, do with them what they wanted. We never talked about it in the camp, never with each other. But our silence and our absence after the sexual abuse said it all.
Nusreta Sivac has fought to prosecute these crimes. It is estimated that more than 20,000 Bosnian women were raped at the time.
This is a process of destroying communities through a form of violence that does not come out of gun barrels, but is in other ways targeted directly at the people.
Even if Slobodan Milosevic always denies it, what happens in Bosnia happens with his consent.
U Bosni je građanski rat između tri zajednice. U Bosni ne ratuje ni Srbija, ni Crna Gora, ni Savezna Republika Jugoslavija. Ratuju međusobno te tri zajednice muslimani, Srbi i Hrvati. Ali mi nikad nismo bili ni gospodari, ni naredbodavci delu srpskog naroda koji živi u Bosni i Hercegovini.
In fact, Yugoslavia, what was left of it, supported the Bosnian Serbs in many ways. There were many officers and higher military officials who were still on Belgrade's payroll. For example, Ratko Mladic, the commander-in-chief, received his salary from Belgrade.
Hundreds of thousands flee the contested territories. Almost 500,000 Bosnians flee to Germany alone in the first year of the war.
The scenes that are documented in Srebrenica are the same as the scenes in Nazi Germany, in Cambodia, in Chairman Mao's China, in native Seneca lands in America, Taino lands in the West Indies, lands invaded by Mongols, a long list dating back thousands of years. Indeed, it is a phenomenon of the past 5,000 years. And I want to emphasize that because my major theme is that what we see happening in these individual events are not individual events. It follows a long pattern of what we have created as a society for humans. Mind you, wherever you go, wherever you travel, you can go and look at, you know, the ancient places of Rome and Greece, wherever throughout Europe, Europe, South America, North America, Asia. What you're looking at, when you look at it, understand that you're standing on what I consider to be blood-soaked land. And that's the bigger problem. We need to understand how it is we are so aggressive and brutal if we're really going to do anything substantial about it. Now, what takes place in the genocide in Srebrenica is documented by the people who perpetrated these crimes. And it took a police officer from France working as a journalist to uncover it.
These are pictures that were shot by the criminals themselves. They were all Serbs.
There, at that point in the film, the killers arrive. They have them step forward one by one. There. They've just killed the first one. In the meantime, the guy behind watches. as does the third one in line, who sees the others fall while he waits for his turn. Now it's his turn. They then get them to carry the bodies of the previous 4 victims into a nearby house, making them believe that they'll be spared.
Les tueurs leur font croire qu'ils ont la vie sauve.
And once the task is complete, they're executed as well. They call them the lucky ones. The awful truth is that no matter how shocking these scenes are, they don't reflect the situation of other executions which were much larger scale, and where the prisoners had even more time to realize what was going to happen to them, not to mention the dreadful, indescribable treatment they underwent.
En sus de cette exécution, subit des mauvais traitements difficilement descriptibles.
Despite this document and thousands of witness accounts, the Serbian authorities continue to deny the genocide of Srebrenica. The French superintendent has therefore decided to use the only arms at his disposal, his investigation and his words.
It's important to understand that when you look closely at these events, it really is looking into the abyss. It is sobering. It is difficult to believe that these are the things that we do.
On the 11th of July, Ratko Mladic and his troops breached the Srebrenica protection zone. Almost all Muslims have left the city by now. Most of the men have fled into the woods at the last moment, hoping to make their way on foot to the next protection zone. Women and children, along with a few hundred men, seek shelter in the Dutch Blue Helmet camp 6 kilometers away.
I went to the United Nations with my daughter. But when I saw how many men were on their way to the base, I ran back to get my son. But he refused and said, "No, Mom, I'm not a woman. I'm not going to the base."
Around 25,000 people hope for protection from the Blue Helmets, but the soldiers are completely overwhelmed. There's a large factory hall on base. When Fadila and her daughter flee here in July 1995, the hall is overflowing.
We slept on the concrete for 2 nights. We felt no hunger or thirst. There was no time to think about anything other than death.
There were 5,000 people at the factory. That was just terrible. They whimpered and cried. There was a stench in the factory hall that was unbearable and unimaginable. I remembered that most of all, the smell of death that hung in that factory.
The ground is covered in people who fear for their lives. But the UN soldiers have no chance against the superior Serbs and offer no resistance. The Dutch UN commander, Karamans, negotiates with Ratko Mladic about evacuating the refugees. But Mladic has already decided that no Muslim man will leave the camp alive. His friendliness is an ice-cold facade.
Molim vas, budite veoma strpljivi. Svi koji žele da ostanu, mogu da ostanu. Svi koji žele da napuste ovu teritoriju također mogu. Obezbedili smo dovoljno i autobusa i kamiona, bit ćete premlačeni do Hladnjaka. Samo polako.
In front of UN headquarters, dozens of buses are ready to leave. Serbian soldiers oversee the process. Women and children board the buses. The men are sorted out.
We saw that too, and we realized that it wouldn't end well for the men. but it was inconceivable that it could take on such proportions.
Fadila Efendic and her daughter are among the women who leave the camp in Potocari. Fadila boards the bus, hoping to see her husband and son again soon.
The last thing I heard was that my husband and son were alive and safe. I left Potocari with this thought. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for me to get on a truck and leave. I would have looked for them.
Almost all Muslim men in the UN camp are shot dead. On the same day, Mladic's troops start hunting the men who have fled into the woods, even with tanks. The refugees are weak, starving, unable to defend themselves. Those who fall into Serbian fighters' hands are gunned down. More than 8,000 Muslim men and boys are killed.
Remaining silent for him is the same.
We're going to pick back up on the French police officer who's done an investigation of this.
Was forgetting and forgiving what happened.
This is the crossroads of Konjević-Polje, where one mass grave was discovered. There on the right was one execution site. There in the field, just on the right-hand side, there. And just on the left over there, there's a group of communal graves, and one behind the line of trees as well. There are over 100 bodies there which were exhumed, their hands tied behind their backs, and not even blindfolded.
The French policeman agrees to retrace the criminal steps for us, step by step, massacre by massacre. In less than 5 days, from July 12th to 17th, 1995, almost 8,000 men were to be killed in this region. On either side of this road, which he has called the axis of death, there are dozens of execution sites and 43 known mass graves. The French policeman has taken this route hundreds of times, sometimes with great fear and often under a military escort. His investigation was delicate. It started here in this ghost town, Srebrenica, where there are now only a handful of Muslim families remaining. Ethnic cleansing took place here. Srebrenica is now predominantly Serbian and Orthodox. And here, the law of silence is a reality. War criminals are protected by the population, starting with this man, Ratko Mladic. This is where Mladic began his sadistic plan on July 11th, 1995.
Yes, exactly. He was giving an interview on the roundabout just in front of us, facing that building.
What did he say?
Poklanjamo srpskom narodu ovaj grad i napokon došao je trenutak da se posle bune protiv Dahija Turcima osvetimo na ovom prostoru.
By Turks, he means the Bosnian Muslims. It's a derogatory term that refers to them.
So the future of the men of Srebrenica was very quickly sealed.
Oh yes, very quickly, on the evening of the 12th, on the face of it.
Mladic decided that they should all die?
According to all the information in our possession, it was indeed his decision.
Ratko Mladic was the leader of the Serbian army in Bosnia. For him, it was now time for revenge. On July 12, 1995, after taking Srebrenica, he put his plan into action, a plan which led to the execution of almost 8,000 Muslim men. The first stage was here in Potokari. Thanks to the numerous witness accounts and the films shot by Serbian television, Jean-René Ruiz has been able to build up the many pieces of the puzzle. And there are many of them. First of all, more than 30,000 people, often elderly men and exhausted women and children, were grouped together in this camp. The Dutch soldiers of the United Nations were supposed to be protecting them. It was not to be the case. The UN soldiers stood by and watched and did nothing to stop Ratko Mladic.
Molim vas, budite veoma strpljivi. Samo malo. Bez panike i propustite malu djecu i žene. Nemojte da se neko dijete izgubi. Ne bojte se ništa, niko vam neće ništa uraditi.
At that point, his sadistic plan had already been concocted. It was to be put into place in less than a week. All Mladic's men knew what they had to do. First, they had to reassure the population in order to deceive them better. Then, over the next 2 days, they put the women on one side and the men on the other.
What's going on today here?
You know what's going on.
I just came here.
You know what's going on.
At that time, the UN soldiers knew exactly what was going to happen to those thousands of civilians.
As the separations of men and women went on, men were herded into that house, the white one just behind us. Once the house was packed with prisoners, the others were carried off in coaches in the direction of Bratunac, and the whole process was repeated throughout July the 12th and 13th. As for the women and children, they were loaded onto buses parked along this road and were taken off in the direction of the Bosnian territories.
Some of the men of Srebrenica tried to discreetly run away. But after 2 days and nights in the forests, with non-stop bombing, all the Muslims gradually gave up and came out. This child will be one of the few survivors of the group. This father believes he's in safety and calls out to his son, who finally gives himself up. They will both be executed.
On July the 16th, starting from 10 a.m. onwards, prisoners who'd been kept at the school of Kula a few kilometers from here were loaded onto buses and brought here. The commander of executioners from the 10th group was waiting for them. The buses arrived along here. So the buses arrived here and parked there. The men from the 10th group got on the buses. The drivers were forced to kill the prisoners so as to make sure they wouldn't talk. They were then marched along the path and brought here. From that zone onwards, the men were all lined up in a row, and the killers went behind them and shot them. Then another group would arrive, walk past the bodies, stop. The killers would stand behind them and would kill them. And so it went on, and throughout the day the bodies spread out further into the field. So you see there's a recognizable line, and all this part here, the part where we are now, and continuing in front of us over 100 meters or so was strewn with bodies. So everywhere where we're walking now, at that time was covered with corpses.
How many of them carried out the massacre?
There were 8 members of the 10th sabotage group, and they were gradually joined by volunteers from Bratunac who came to give them a hand.
This man, Drazen Erdimovic, was one of the killers. He was 26 years old at the time.
I have decided to plead guilty.
You and the members of your unit were supposed to do regarding those Muslims from Srebrenica?
Da.
Yes. What did he say?
Da, treba.
That we have to execute those people, to shoot them.
Jean-René was the first to interrogate this repenting killer. His confession led to the identification of the site of the executions. This farm, where one sunny Sunday, nearly 1,200 Muslim civilians were executed in cold blood. To confirm the account of the killer, other evidence was needed. It would take Jean-René months to get it. These photographs.
This photo dates from July 17th, 1995, the day after the executions at the Bragnevo farm. On this photo we can see parts of the now destroyed building, as well as the field where the prisoners were executed.
Has fled. The 10th Sabotage Unit is the first to enter the town. There was no fighting, only these houses which were burned. General Mladic congratulates his soldiers. Among them, the 10th Sabotage Unit.
We came down by this road. There was no resistance. But mind you, I'm only talking about my unit. I can't speak for what happened with the others. As for the 40 members of our unit, we really encountered no resistance at all. We came in exactly as we're doing now.
This is the first time that this man has returned to Srebrenica since the end of the war. Town still bears the scars of the battles and the 4 years it spent under Serbian gunfire. Today, the area is patrolled by the American Army. We film their vehicles from a car driven by a war criminal. Bragno is tense. Further on, in the center of town, we are stopped. We are told to stop filming. At no time do the Americans ask Bragno or the man in red for their identity papers. They are only interested in erasing the shots where they appear on film. The next day, we meet up at Branyan's house. The man in red no longer wants anything to do with us. We finally ask Branyo the question which has obsessed us since we first met. But first, we remind him of the accusations which have been made against him by one of his own men.
Brano Gojkovic.
What does he think of what Ermidovic said in court?
Erdemovic lied. We know him. We know what he's like. He's only lying. I don't know. He's only lying.
And what if he were arrested?
If I was arrested? I don't know. I haven't really thought about it. Tribunal seems to be accusing all Serbs. There are very few Bosnians, very few Croatians. I don't know what to say.
He had promised his men €4 for every man executed. Although he has been identified by the tribunal, Gojkovic has never been bothered by international justice. For the last 10 years, he has been living happily with his wife, their 2 children, and his cat. And yet, Jean-René is unequivocal. This man ought to be tried for crimes against humanity. Tried not only for the massacre at the Branjevo farm, but also for the massacre at the House of Culture of Pilica. Jean-René took us there.
That's it. A bit further forward so we can get away if necessary. Okay? Right, let's go.
We have to be very discreet.
You'll have to climb over here. It'd be a good idea if the other guy, what's his name, stayed outside just to keep an eye and make sure nobody comes. Be careful, there's a hole here. It's full of crap, but we'll try not to walk in it.
For the first time, Jean-René seems very tense. So?
The place is still in the same state. In fact, the executions began with the soldiers firing through the windows. The people who were inside had to take refuge at the back or below. Then the shots continued through the door on the right. Then finally, grenades were thrown under the stage where some people had taken refuge. You can still see the traces of the explosions on the wall.
How many people were there inside?
About 500, according to the estimations of the lieutenant colonel who gave the order to fire.
These shots were filmed by the investigators less than 1 year after the massacre. They wanted to fix the crime scenes. At that time, the investigators' only fear was that the Serbs would erase all trace of these executions. The bullet impacts, the splashes of blood. Even when everything seems obvious, like here, samples have to be taken and analyzed.
So here the executions took place on July the 16th and the 17th. The bodies were removed, loaded on a lorry, and after several return trips, all the corpses were taken to the Branjo farm to be buried along with those killed there.
The point that I want to make is that when you look at an international event like this, or an individual crime. You have the immediate problem, the here and now. What are we going to do to respond to this? And you can see what he's trying to do is to gather the evidence to be able to prosecute the people who perpetrated these acts. And that needs to be done. But we also need to look deeper and broader into this phenomenon, because what's happening here is the same thing that happened in Sandtown when we killed Native Americans, that happened in My Lai in Vietnam, that happened in Rwanda. I mean, you can change, the circumstances and the names and the languages, but the essence of what is happening, the idea that we are going to perpetrate genocide, if we just get rid of these people, if we kill them, then all of our problems are over and we can go on and have a fulfilling life. Think about that. I mean, that's what's going on. And they know that it's wrong, so they don't want to admit it, but they know that that's what they did. Amongst themselves, they decided our problems are not about the people of power who are not allowing everyone to have a common good. It's all about our problems are related to Islam, are related to this minority or that minority. Our greatest problems are kids who want to be transgender. This is, and so they come, it's a simple answer. As you heard in the ethics class prior to this one, it's talking about how we really want simple answers to complex problems. And that is what is playing out here. And I wanted to present this just to highlight how much of what goes on in the Balkans is what has gone on for a very long period of time. And we have yet to really get to the root causes of these problems so that as living organisms, we can do something about it. And what happens is that in lacking the ability to really deal with the problems, we wind up going through rituals as if we are being forthright in it. Now we will see where we'll create memorials to the massacres as a way of insulating ourselves from having to deal with the bigger problem.
Unfortunately, yes, Europe in the larger sense has witnessed genocide in the past.
July 2005. Srebrenica is preparing to commemorate the genocide. This is the 10th anniversary. The cemetery only holds 1,000 tombs. These are the only ones who have, for the moment, been identified and properly buried. That day we learn of another mass grave, situated above the memorial. Jean-René wants to go there.
Hello, how are you?
Ah, Jean-René.
Are you well?
Fine, my friend, thank you.
So we meet again.
When did you arrive?
Friday evening.
Are you staying here?
No, I leave Monday. I'm not here for the ceremony.
Oh, no?
No.
I thought you were staying here as the ceremony was taking place.
No, I don't belong here.
I know, my friend. I know.
This Bosnian journalist has helped Jean-René throughout his investigation.
Have you seen that there's another mass grave here?
No, I haven't, but I'm very interested to hear about it. I don't know where it is, though.
There's a team working there already.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Great.
They're working non-stop.
Are they working there now?
Yes, I was there just half an hour ago.
Okay.
Jean-René tried very hard to distance himself from this investigation. He officially stopped in 2000. After a sabbatical of 2 years, he went back into the French police force. But he can't get away from this drama. He can't let go of his mission. Are they still finding mass graves 10 years later?
Yes, and it was important to find this particular one. We'll see what it reveals, but it will be interesting to learn how this site came about.
Certainement très intéressant à connaître.
He is still familiar with all those who have continued working on this mission, like this head of the exhumation team. This sign reminds us that Srebrenica was a zone under the protection of the United Nations. It says that this genocide must be a lesson for future generations. What the families want is the truth about the 8,000 men who disappeared from Srebrenica. What happened to their husbands, their fathers, their sons? Why were they executed? They are all obsessed with these questions day and night. Has your work enabled other victims to start their mourning?
Yes.
Did it take long?
Yes, for these women it was definitely very, very long. And for others it's even longer because the vast majority are still waiting to find their loved ones and to bury their menfolk. Wait.
The problem
with a case like this is that you don't talk about people. We dehumanize the individual by talking about massive numbers. You talk about volumes, not about individuals. In an investigation like this, you talk about volumes and measures. A measure is a lorry, a bus, a depot, a school gym, or classrooms. So when you're talking about victims, you don't mention persons, but volumes. Until one day you manage to identify someone, and then at that point you have an individual, a person in a coffin.
As I say, when you get very close to these things, it is the essence of looking into the abyss. And there's an effort to hold accountable the people who led this effort.
Officially, the NATO forces present here have been charged with arresting the main war criminals. Radovan Karadzic, the ex-president of the Serbs in Bosnia, and his military chief of staff, Radko Mladic. Jean René's investigation has proved that they planned the genocide. Since being charged in July 1995, they have never been arrested. Dozens of operations have been mounted without success. And yet, during the first years, they made no attempt to hide. We were able to meet Radovan Karadzic in December 1995. It was the last interview he gave to a foreign journalist. He appeared calm and serene that day. He was scoffing at the international community.
Did you meet or did I4 troops try to arrest you?
No, they have never tried to arrest me. I'm traveling through my country, but I'm not traveling through the checkpoints of the I4. This is my country. I have many, many roads, and I travel whenever I think I have to travel.
Are you afraid by
No.
them?
Do I look like scared?
And the ex-president of the Serbs in Bosnia takes this opportunity to defend his military chief of staff, Ratko Mladic.
General Mladic has never issued anything wrong, anything that would allow any individual to commit atrocities. If any individual have made atrocities, revenge and so on, because that was a civil war, then those individuals have to be tried by our own national judiciary.
At the same time, Ratko Mladic, surrounded by his bodyguards, is enjoying his favorite hobby, thumbing his nose at the international community. Mladic, like Karadzic, feels himself above international laws, untouchable.
Može se reći da se odmorio. Danas jedno možda 40 puta smo se pustili sa ovim momcima i bilo je pravo zadovoljstvo.
And so we've looked at what's happened in Srebrenica. Not far from there is the memorial, where next week, while that's going on, Sarajevo has been under siege for several years. And we're going to look at that next week. I want to highlight, again, what is my main theme is that we must look at the broad picture to identify root causes and really formulate some mechanism to try to mitigate that. Simply arresting the perpetrators with this particular atrocity is not going to solve it. The other day, several of us attended a lecture over at Emory about Turkey. And it was a really wonderful presentation. The professor was from University of California at Berkeley. And as I said, frequently historians, as much as I am a consumer of history and I respect their work, they focus very much on a narrow point in history. And that's what their research is about. And I had asked a question about Turkey and the many empires that had held control over Turkey. Mind you, Turkey is the source of the Ottoman Empire and certainly a part of what I consider the Balkans region. And the professor was a little bit, well, what do you mean? You know, the many empires, and I, said, well, Rome, and those, and she spoke to that a little bit. The presidential seal in Turkey, this is the presidential seal. The stars represent the 16 empires over the past 3,000 years, no, less than 3,000 years, that have ruled over Turkey. I mean, just consider that. What's gone on, when you get out into the big picture, the individual attack, the individual assault, the Ratko Mladic are really irrelevant. They get lost when you come out into the big picture. And when you understand what's going on here is empire upon empire upon empire, it is a tribute to robbery in service of financial gain. With that, we can, let me stop this share, and we can open up for discussion.
So as usual, everyone can use the raise the hand feature or put a question in or comment in chat for Sal. You were right, this was sobering, this was horrific. But what I don't understand, I guess, is why do we hear so much more about certain episodes of genocide than others. So, for instance, we are constantly reminded of the Holocaust and the genocide of the Jews, but we have not been reminded as frequently about this type of thing, or recently was in the news again about Rwanda, but it's a quick 2-second type of activity. It doesn't really expose the horror of it in the way that it should be exposed. So that's my first comment / question. Why do some get covered more than others? And my second question is about the police officer from France. What was his motivation to get into all of this? Do you know?
No, I don't. I think they talked about it at the beginning of the film, but he recognized that this was a, horrible event and needed to be investigated. And if you've been involved in investigations, there are, processes and rules around how you conduct a legitimate investigation. And, there's a lot of people who engage in investigations who really don't know what they're doing and create a bunch of junk, Fox News. So, he felt an obligation to want to bring his professional expertise to bear on this. And it was very difficult. Mind you, I've, in my many times as I've investigated things like this, you really, it's so affecting. It's hard to insulate yourself from it and just, do the job, do the work. It is looking into the abyss, and it's very much, I think, difficult to believe that we could do what we've done. Now, why do we know about the stuff that is more of recent history? Certainly we fought a war, the Great World War, and the Holocaust was very much a part of that. So we continue to have, a notion of that. But the Holocaust was certainly not the first genocide and not the last. And I think what you have is the idea of looking at the bigger picture it is not widespread. There is a movement afoot within the history world to start developing historiography of big history. Well, that's what they're calling it now, big history. And that is to try to get into a bigger picture. Mind you, when I read works by historians who are doing big history, it quickly devolves into things that have happened in the past 1,000 years. And so they have trouble looking at the span of our species as an occupant on this planet. But I think it's really important, because when you do look at how we evolved as members of the ape family and how our brain evolved and got smarter and capable of doing things we weren't capable of doing 5 million years ago, that as that happened and we became smarter and able to figure out ways of survival and control of food sources and that sort of thing, that it also unleashed a part of us, not in everyone, but in a segment of us, that phenomenon of greed. And greed has been, in my mind, at the heart of the massive bloodsheds that have taken place. But you only get there if you start looking at the whole you know, array of what's there. Mind you, if you start thinking that, Rome was a horrible place. This was, the building of the Vatican. This was brutality. If you travel to the pyramids or whatever, you start to see the world as a very dangerous place. And we haven't really wanted to confront that, and understandably.
Yeah, it's very painful. Margita, what do you have?
My thoughts are, I appreciate Sal trying to identify in his mind where the brutality started, like with civilization, et cetera, et cetera. I think the jury's out on that. I personally don't think that Homo sapiens was more peaceful. The jury's out on what happened to the Neanderthals and other species. But be that as it may, we really don't know. I think to get out of this mess, as I always say, there's only one solution looking forward through education. And that is from the families, from the educational systems, from the religious organizations, to have children buy into the concept that difference is not dangerous. There's no need to make somebody who looks different or has different preferences as the other, and therefore your enemy. In other words, having children grow up in a diverse environment and calling that ideal and finding all the things that unite us as humans, because they're much, much bigger than our differences. Even, the differences between mammals, animals, and humans are minute. So education to look forward to create people who can think for themselves, enough civic education to strengthen young people to say no to authority that's abusing those concepts, and insisting that the history books do not shy away from painful facts of what a given population, nationality has committed. But for the young people to have the optimism that we can change that. So I don't like to, it doesn't help me to look back and is it civilization? Is it this? What do we do now? And it is to not otherize constantly. Well, that's the only solution, is love your neighbor. And so I had a sarcastic laugh when what was it, Milosevic before, with the cross, the Christian cross and the Holy Mary. This man doesn't even understand the basic morals of what Christianity is teaching. So this is just, the fig leaf. But anyway, most religions have this love your neighbor as yourself. So it's not like a huge new concept or the golden rule. We just need to be consistent, I think. And I think there is hope, but we need to disobey bad authorities in order to accomplish that. Sorry to be so long.
No. I appreciate that view. In contrast, mine is that if you don't understand the deep history of it, it becomes very difficult to create a strategy to change that. I agree that education is a very important factor, but I feel it's only one. I think there are many more, and it's to come up with an answer. I don't have it. I mean, I think it would be complex, and it would require a consortium of various levels of expertise to try to come up with some strategy to try to mitigate what has happened with greed. Mind you, the idea of the other is a tool that the powerful use. It's not just persuading someone that, look, the other is not a good thing, we need to be united. The powerful have a much bigger megaphone, and they have, you know, very sophisticated techniques to be able to apply to frighten people and to gin them up against whoever the other is. They also, you know, look what they can do with education. We've had more books banned in the past, I don't know, 3 years or whatever than has ever happened.
That was my point. Yeah.
Yeah, we now we have.
We need to say no to that abusive authority and have people have the guts to stand up in civil disobedience, or as John Lewis said, you know.
Well, but mind you, the people
good trouble
who are doing this are elected by the people who we're saying should protest. Mind you, we now have maybe 12 states where they have passed criminal statutes for librarians that give out books that they later consider to be pornography or whatever. So all I'm saying is that it's difficult to respond to a problem that is this entrenched on an ad hoc individual basis.
Vote.
It's gonna require a
yes. Go vote and make your friends and acquaintances vote. As long as you live in a democracy, you can use the election, the means of elections to change.
Well, again, not to be too counter, my view is, even if everybody does vote and we do all of that well, it is a Band-Aid on a bigger problem. And I think we really, mind you, my view may be grandiose. You know, how can we get the world leaders to come together to say, we all need to do this differently? I feel that there has been progress towards that with the forming of the UN, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization. Mind you, since the end of World War II, a lot has happened. It was very difficult for me to get this into my brain, and that is to recognize that significant change isn't going to happen in a lifetime. It's going to take many lifetimes. And I was not, but mind you, you have to understand, I guess I would have been 25, 26 years old in college. I thought we were going to change everything. There would be no more racism. We were going to end it. I'm serious. In fact, I believe so strong, we were going to end all the misogyny in the world. I ran for homecoming queen at the University of Delaware in 1977 as a protest against the beauty queen contest. and I thought that by doing that, I would end all that sexist. I know. So I understand, and I would have history professors who I love to this day, who would say to me, "We obviously haven't taught you anything." You know, it's not going to happen like that. And now I've come to feel that it's going to take a process like the continent splitting apart and moving apart, a long, slow, tedious process. But I believe that if we keep educating people, I can't change the power. I can try to educate, try to share information, try to give an analysis that hopefully makes sense to people over these conflicts that they can then digest and think about. And through that, we will pass along to others a way of thinking that isn't there. Yeah. So. But then I pontificate.
Oh gosh. Well, Sal, How about you give us a little insight into next week?
Well, next week we're going to look at Sarajevo and what happened there. This is again another enormous tragedy. This is a beautiful city, multi-ethnic, diversified. People had jobs. People had when I say they had money, they had disposable income. That means that you're not wealthy and, you know, rolling in the dough, but you got enough to say, you know what? I think I'm going to stop by Starbucks and spend $7 on a latte. You know, I mean, it was like they could think like, they could say, you know, I think I'm going to take a ride up to Rome, Georgia and eat lunch. You know, I mean, they're not living extravagantly, but they're able to enjoy life. And it was a beautiful situation. And then one day a bomb went off in the middle of it. And and people, they could not believe that this is where we are. Despite all the history that has surrounded it, it's a tragedy. It's a very sad tragedy.
Yeah, I remember seeing the bullet holes and the Olympic Village after all that. Just terrible. Well, thank you everyone for coming.
Okay, everyone.
And we will see you guys all next week.
Okay, everyone, please be safe.
Thanks, Cal.
Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Bob.